Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking a deep breath and cracking open some complex, definitely highly charged, and honestly extremely fascinating academic work.
Yeah, it really gets into the weeds.
It does. This material looks right at the formation of Iranian identity, Persian nationalism, and this concept they call internal colonization.
Right. Heavy stuff, but important.
Our sources are academic, critical, and pretty specific. And to help you understand the high stakes involved in defining who is and maybe who isn't truly Iranian, we're starting with a story. It's from 2018.
The Fields Medal Award.
Exactly. Often called the Nobel Prize for Mathematics. And it went to this brilliant mathematician, Khosrowshahi.
Cambridge professor now.
Yeah, that's right. But he was born in Iran, ethnically Kurdish. And when he accepted that huge global award, he dedicated it, hoping the news would, put a smile on the faces of, quote, those 40 million people.
A direct reference to Kurds worldwide.
Yeah.
Unmistakable.
Absolutely. And that statement, which probably seemed pretty straightforward on a global stage, it just immediately exploded back home. Big controversy.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like a minor political disagreement. For many Iranian Persians, both inside Iran and elsewhere, it was seen as actual treason, or at least a betrayal of the state.
Wow, treason.
That's how strong the sun felt. And what's really telling, what the sources really focus on, is the state's reaction. You had government officials, even the vice president, publicly saying he should be called by his old Persian name, Ferdun Darakhshani, not Kosher Birkar.
So actively rejecting his chosen name and his Kurdish identity.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the sources use this incident, this really intense state focus on a name and an ethnic dedication, as a kind of microcosm. They argue it's not just some isolated flare-up.
Okay.
It's presented as one piece of evidence in a much longer systematic pattern of trying to assimilate non-Persian cultures in Iran of, structural oppression.
Right. And that really sets up our mission for this deep dive, doesn't it? We're using that specific reaction to kind of critically look at what Iranian identity actually means, at least as defined by the dominant group, and how that official definition historically produces what these scholars are calling the internal colonized other. Let's start unpacking that maybe with the core state ideology.
Sure. So if we look at the official thinking, the groundwork was really laid back in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Persian nationalism wasn't just, one cultural idea among many.
It became the ideology.
It became the state ideology. And it really reached its most systematic and often pretty brutal form under the Pahlavi dynasty.
Okay.
And the policy, driven by this strong desire for state unity, was devastatingly simple when you boil it down.
Yeah.
One country, one nation, and one language.
Simple, but harsh in practice, I imagine.
Extremely. It meant that non-Persian identities, whether cultural, historical, linguistic, they were actively pushed to the margins, repressed, sometimes even criminalized.
And how are they framed?
Consistently labeled, officially designated as manufactured ethnic identities, and seen as these constant threats to Iran's territorial integrity.
So, a policy of forced homogenization. But there's an academic framework for analyzing this kind of internal pressure, right? Internal colonialism.
That's the one. The sources bring in this theory.
How's it defined, roughly?
It's defined as, and I'm quoting loosely here, the rule of one ethnic group over other such groups living within the continuous boundaries of a single state.
Okay, so it's not just about, say, arguments over regional power or federalism.
No, the key implication is that it creates a real formal hierarchy, structural control, political, cultural, economic.
Right.
And the structure looks a lot like classic colonialism, between countries. But this is happening inside the borders of one state, specifically structured along ethno-linguistic lines.
That's the crucial difference, internal.
Exactly. So when scholars use this for Iran, they argue that what non-Persian groups like Kurds or Azeri Turks have been doing historically, their resistance, their cultural assertions shouldn't just be seen as like domestic politics.
But as something more specific.
Yeah, as resistance against internal colonialism. Resistance against a system imposed by the Persian-centric state.
That really raises the stakes. Okay, but here's the tricky part for me. If the goal is this single unified Iranian nation, how do the Persian elites justify imposing their specific culture and language as the neutral national standard, especially while saying they aren't imposing an ethnicity at all?
Well, that brings us to this core rhetorical trick, what the sources call linguistic synonymy. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is simple.
Okay.
The state nationalist discourse basically just swapped labels. It equated the identity of the sovereign community, the Persians, with the identity of the entire country, the polity.
So Persian equals Iranian.
In the official story, yes, Persian identity and Iranian identity become the same thing, which means, by definition, any other identity is automatically less than Iranian, or maybe not be fully Iranian.
And language plays a huge role here, the terminology they use.
Absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm.
Non-Persians get specific labels, terms that sort of downgrade them. They might be called Qawmi,
Which means?
ethnic,
Yeah.
or they might be called Bumi or Mahali, meaning sort of local or native.
And the weight of those terms matters.
Hugely. If you're Qawmi ethnic, it implies you're just one particular subgroup. Meanwhile, the Persian Center insists it's the neutral national core, that it doesn't have an ethnicity in that same way.
Right. So what happens if one of these ethnic groups, these non-Persian communities, pushes back, tries to assert its own culture?
It gets shut down, immediately attacked. Their actions are labeled ethnocentric, or, and this is the really heavy label, separatist, Tajia Talab. The language itself boxes them in.
And that brings us back to that paradox you mentioned, the Persian elite denying that Persian is even an ethnicity.
Yes, they have to insist that Persian is just the neutral national language. It's framed as the, quote, reservoir of Iranian thought, sentiment, and values.
So denying their own ethnic identity is necessary.
It's absolutely crucial,
Yeah.
because that denial is what justifies imposing their language on everyone else. It turns a specific ethno-linguistic tool into this universal national requirement.
Wow. Can we trace this push for homogeneity back?
Oh yeah, the sources trace this drive for linguistic and cultural uniformity way back to the sort of fathers of Persian nationalism in the late 19th, early 20th centuries.
Like who?
Well, figures like Aga Khan Kermani. He really pushed this idea that language is history, making linguistic unity essential for historical legitimacy.
Language is history. Okay.
And then you have someone like Ahmad Khafravi, who was frankly much more blunt about it.
How so?
He openly argued for basically wiping out non-Persian languages, specifically named Turkish, Arabic, and Kurdish.
Wiping them out. Culturally, you mean?
Yes, cultural elimination. His justification was stark. The least diversity, the better national unity. The goal from the start, for some key intellectuals, was total linguistic conformity, even if it meant erasing other languages deliberately.
That's quite a statement. And it runs completely counter to how modern linguists think about language, doesn't it?
Totally. I mean, today linguists generally see the difference between a dialect and a language as mostly about sociopolitics, about power, not really grammar.
Right, like that famous saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The official language is but a dialect with an army-navy. It highlights how political power often dictates which way of speaking gets called the language and which gets demoted to dialect.
And this control isn't just exercised by the government, the Army-Navy part. You mentioned intellectuals play a role.
A huge role. Persian intellectuals, writers, historians, they provide what the sources call the epistemic ground for the state.
Epistemic ground, meaning?
The sort of intellectual foundation, the justification. They generate and sustain this whole process of internal colonization, mainly by carefully constructing the narrative of history.
So history itself becomes a tool, a weapon even. What are the main stories, the key narratives used to create this idea of a single, unchanging Iranian identity?
The sources focus on two big ones. First, and historically maybe the most potent, is Aryanism.
Okay, Aryanism, we hear that term.
Right. It's this often racialized narrative. It claims this unbroken line of history and unity going all the way back to ancient figures like Darius the Great, around 500 BC.
But it's described as fictitious.
Highly fictitious, according to these critical sources. And its function isn't just about claiming ancient roots. It's about actively assimilating or just erasing the histories of anyone deemed non-Aryan. Peoples who might have lived there for ages but don't fit the chosen racial story.
Okay, so that's one pillar. What's the second?
The second one is maybe more common in recent scholarship, but critics argue it serves a similar purpose. It's the concept of the Persianate world.
Persianate world. I've seen that used.
It's used widely, yes. But the critique is that, especially in the hands of state-focused historians, it becomes this kind of primordialist nostalgia, meaning it selectively emphasizes only the Persian aspects of vast, historically multi-ethnic, multilingual regions. It kind of retroactively labels these complex areas as primarily Persian.
And in doing so,
it effectively erases the other major players, the Turkish influences, the Kurdish history, the Arabic contributions, from the historical narrative of those places.
So we're talking about actively silencing parts of the past. Can you give an example of a voice that gets sort of pushed aside by this singular narrative?
Yeah, the sources bring up the Kurdish leader Ismail Aga Simco. This is way back in 1922, even before the Pahlavi state fully cemented its control.
Okay, what did he say?
Simco stated very clearly, quote, "I am a Kurd and have dedicated my life to my nation. I shall never accept the rule of Persians."
1922, that's early.
It's crucial because the standard center-driven history often suggests that Kurdish self-awareness or demands for rights only emerged much later, purely as a reaction to the Pahlavi state's policies.
Ah, so they try to make the resistance seem more recent, less historically rooted.
Precisely. It shrinks the timeline of non-Persian self-assertion. The overall effect is this very state-centered nationalist history. It's obsessed with historicism, this idea of timeless national destinies and laws.
Right.
And it works hard to present Iranian history as this smooth, unbroken line stretching back millennia. It even downplays massive disruptions.
Like what?
Like the Arab expansion, the Mongol invasions, huge historical shifts. But the narrative tends to minimize them, suggesting they were just minor interruptions to the essential underlying Persian identity.
That denial of fragmentation is really interesting, especially when you look at how these same elites engage with global ideas like post-colonial theory. There's a contradiction there, isn't there? The post-colonial paradox.
Huge contradiction. Is fascinating.
We often see Persian elites using anti-colonial language, criticizing Western imperialism, Orientalism, which is a valid critique, of course.
Absolutely. But here's the twist, the paradox. They often, at the same time, implicitly relied on some Eurocentric ideas themselves, like that Aryan theory we just discussed.
Right.
And they actually used the critique of external colonialism, Western colonialism, to somehow justify their own internal domination over non-Persians.
So borrowing the language of liberation to enforce control internally?
That's exactly it. The sources call it Orientalism in reverse.
Orientalism in reverse, great term. They critique the West for Orientalizing the East, but then apply similar hierarchical logic to their own non-Persian minorities.
Precisely. And this intellectual framing lets the dominant community maintain what you could call a sort of persistent anxiety.
Anxiety about what?
About difference. About non-Persian self-assertion. Whether it's asking for language rights or economic fairness or just cultural recognition, these demands are almost never seen as legitimate political issues arising from within Iran.
How are they seen then?
They get dismissed. Frequently dismissed as either, foreign interference, outside powers, stirring things up, or maybe slightly better, but still dismissive, just accumulated anger about general government neglect or corruption.
Ah, so it avoids the core issue.
Completely. It's
Yeah.
a very effective way to obscure the deep historical reality of internal colonization and the structural inequalities. It reframes a systemic ethno-linguistic hierarchy as just, bad local administration or something temporary.
And it's sobering how widespread this view seems to be, even among those who oppose the current government on other issues.
Yeah, that's a key point in the sources. Even political dissidents. Many left-leaning intellectuals who are very critical of the regime otherwise, they often still cling very tightly to the sacredness of territorial integrity
And the special status of Persian.
and the devotion to Sweet Persian as the one true national language. They tend to remain silent, largely, about systemic state violence or discrimination against non-Persian communities.
Why? What's the underlying reason given?
The sources point to this fundamental anxiety over separatism. The fear that acknowledging these internal differences too much or validating non-Persian demands could lead to the country breaking apart. That fear seems to override calls for equality for these groups.
Okay, so stepping back from all this, what does it tell us about how we should approach historical scholarship that comes from this Persian-centric perspective?
Well, it means we have to recognize that the production of knowledge is deeply political, right?
Right.
This Persian-centered history writing, we talked about Aryanism, the Persian world narrative, it hasn't just been academic. It's functioned as a really important tool.
A tool for what?
For homogenizing non-Persians, for sustaining these ethno-linguistic hierarchies. And it does that through the systematic, often state-backed erasure of difference.
So bringing it back to the beginning, that whole controversy over Koçaberkar's name and dedication.
It perfectly illustrates the core conflict, doesn't it? It shows how the dominant sovereign community defines who belongs.
By demanding conformity.
By demanding conformity to their supposedly neutral but actually Persian-centric ideal. And any non-Persian self-affirmation like Birkar's dedication gets viewed as subversive, as resistance against the imposed singular identity.
And the whole system seems to rest on this fundamental contradiction.
Exactly. claiming sameness, we're all Iranians, while simultaneously enforcing difference, but only our Persian identity is the neutral national core.
And the dominant group gets to decide. They have this privileged epistemology.
That's the term used, yeah. This privileged position allows them to unilaterally decide whose history matters, whose culture counts as national, and whose identity is just dismissed as manufactured or illegitimate.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a pretty heavy final thought to consider, maybe about the role of scholarship itself.
I think so. If the dominant community's identity gets treated almost like an inert fact of nature, like it was always there and always will be.
While other identities, non-Persian ones, are systematically called manufactured, artificial, and therefore somehow less real.
Then what responsibility does that place on historians? On the study of history itself? How does our work determine which communities get a voice, and which ones end up pushed to that voiceless margin?